Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, cowboys and cowgirls. Welcome to Tombstone, Arizona. We're glad you're here. Now, make sure you check your guns, belly up to the bar, find something comfortable to drink, and enjoy another radio adventure. It is Tales of Old Tombstone with Stuart, Rosebrook, and Boze. The program begins right now.
To the town of our free rode a stranger one fine day. Hardly spoke to folks around him, didn't have too much to say. No one dared to ask his business, no one dared to make a slip. The stranger there among them had a big iron on his hip, big iron on his hip.
Welcome to this week's episode of Tales of Old Tombstone with Boze, Stuart Rosebrook, and our special guest, Mark Boardman of the Tombstone Epitaph, and also the features editor for the past 20 years of True West Magazine. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's good to be back. How are you guys?
Doing great. Always great to have you on the show. We always find out something we didn't know or that you made up.
That's it. What can I make up today?
Well, Mark,
Go ahead.
No. Well, Mark, you and I were talking earlier this week about a big anniversary of John Clum's life. Is it May 3rd was the anniversary of his passing?
Yes, it was. You know, that falls just 2 days after the anniversary of his starting the newspaper and 2 years later selling the newspaper. Both occurred on May 1st. So the month of May was a big one for him.
So when did John Clum come to Tombstone? Tell us a little background on him and that you've been walking in his footsteps here now for a few years.
John Clum was one of those guys who was always looking for excitement and adventure, which was part of the reason that when he got out of college, he first became a meteorologist, a weather observer in Santa Fe. He thought that would be cool. So he went from Rutgers down there, and it was interesting, but not everything he was looking for. And he went from that into becoming the agent, the Indian agent for the Apaches. He had no experience for something like that, and he was still in his 20s. But as I say, he's always looking for something that will give him excitement. Yeah, he was looking for pay, but he initially was looking for something that would get his adrenaline going. So after the Indian agent period collapsed, he tried to be a lawyer, and he found that dreadfully boring. So he started a newspaper in Arizona, out in the middle of nowhere, sort of bounced around between Tucson and smaller towns. And when Tombstone started making a name for itself as a place where things were happening, he decided to take his newspaper and his equipment down there. And so on May 1st, 1880, he started the Epitaph, or that was the first day it was published. And of course, having it called the Epitaph in Tombstone was a pretty good joke and something that he thought would be a good promotional item, which in fact it was then and it is today. He started off in a tent that was right behind where the gird block was built. And it was built there pretty quickly after he put up the tent. And then he moved into one of those offices in the block. And basically for 2 years, he was about as involved in Tombstone as any person could be. He became the mayor. He was head of the library board. He was on the school board. He was the head of the vigilance committee. He was on the anti-Chinese committee. You name it, and he probably was doing it. That was sort of John Clum's town for a while.
Wow. And do you must get chills sometimes when you're actually on site and kind of feel his presence. Tell us about that. It's incredible that you stepped into that position. And by the way, you've done a great job.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I still have to pinch myself to think that I'm following in his footsteps. Um, I think he would laugh the fact that I'm doing it from Indiana. But um, do I feel his presence? Yeah, sometimes I do when I'm in Tombstone in particular. In the museum that the Epitaph has on Fifth Street, which has been the home of the Epitaph since 1927. Um, they've got the original press there, and it's right there in the window, and it. I don't think it's been operated in a few years. I've been pushing. Let's try it out. Let's put this thing up and print a paper out. But yeah, I can feel his presence. Uh, you know, he's really still there in everything we do. I think, you know, he was into writing exciting stories. He was a storyteller, and we certainly try to follow in those footsteps.
I think that he's one of the most. Oh, go
I
ahead,
wanted to
Bob.
ask you, how do you subscribe? I don't. I think most people aren't aware that it's still a living, breathing newspaper, and people, if they were interested in Tombstone, how do they get it?
It's a living, breathing newspaper that is about the Old West. It is not a newspaper of record, which covers current events, although we do sometimes cover, you know, one of the big get-togethers in October. But for getting a subscription, you go to tombstoneepitaph.com, which is the website, and go to the newspaper tab, and it'll show you how to subscribe there. It's very quick and very easy, and we've actually been doing pretty well in terms of subscriptions, and we're real pleased with that.
Well, I think John Clum would appreciate the audacity that the newspaper is still being published, and that you still have followers all over the world reading the paper and keeping the stories of the frontier America and frontier West alive, and bringing people to Tombstone. That and obviously John Clum was attracted to it. I wanted to ask a question about the audaciousness of John Clum, and I've always tried to imagine these newspaper men with a wagon with this, you know, printing press. Where the heck did they get the printing press? Did they go into the Sears catalog? How does it arrive, and how do they get it there?
It believes that they imported it from the East. It was brand new when they got it, and some company manufactured these things, and he got it from the East, put it into work, and then brought it down to Tombstone.
Yeah, and you know, does he save it? Has he saved all his money from working as an Indian agent? And this can't be an inexpensive purchase. Oh, I think I'll go out and buy a newspaper press today.
He saved some money, but you know how the guys back then were. They oftentimes went into debt big time and never really got out of it. And that was a problem for Clum, was living on the edge from a financial standpoint. It got a little bit easier, and you hate to say this, once he lost his wife and his infant daughter in 1881, and it just ripped him apart, but his expenses went down significantly, and I think he was able to climb at least a bit out of debt at that point. But it was always a situation where he was barely keeping his head above water.
Now, is there a complete set of his era or of the newspaper in Cochise County, or is it at the University of Arizona, or even at the state archives? People want to do research on Clum's
state
paper.
Archives should have a complete set. And I believe there is a digitized set at the Library of Congress. We go through that oftentimes to research some things.
And did he have a rival in Tombstone? Because when all of the researchers are trying to track what happened, I know Bob's and both of you have done a lot of research on that era of Tombstone. Do you compare the Epitaph with its competitor, and who was running the competitor in town against Clum?
Tombstone Nugget was the competitor at that point. Clum was a Republican, and so the Epitaph was a Republican organ, and the Nugget was a Democratic supporting newspaper. And as a result, you basically had them taking the two sides during the Earp and Cowboy problems during that period. Although there were some times where the Nugget would find fault with the Cowboys for some outrageous things, but they were very, very critical of the Earps and Doc Holliday. But you did get a fairly good sense of things if you compared the two. And the other thing is, and I've never found out exactly why this occurred, but during the Spicer hearings, the OK Corral hearings that occurred after the gunfight, the Nugget covered everything and had a fairly good transcript of what went down. And the Epitaph did not. Not, as I say, I'm not exactly sure why, but if you want at least the initial look at what happened during those hearings, you have to look at the Nugget. Eventually, the owners of the Nugget bought up the Epitaph.
That's right. Didn't Clum sold out to them, didn't he?
Yes, he did. And they were the ones that had some money, and he was just looking to sell and get out of there as quickly as he could.
Do we know how much they bought it for?
You know, I don't know. It probably wasn't a heck of a lot in today's money. As I say, John, at that point, he'd lost a wife and daughter. He had decided not to run for mayor. His job as the postmaster had been cut back so that he wasn't getting as much income from that. And he really felt that his life was in danger. He was getting threats from the Cowboys and their supporters, and he just wanted to leave quickly as he could. And I think he sold out to the first persons that said, yeah, we'll take it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that he was leaving on the stage, I believe, to go back home, correct, when the stage was stopped, and he felt like it was an indirect, they were out to kill him. And what I love about that story is he was questioned about what he did, and he said he went over to the Grand Central Mine and called downtown on the phone. It's just such a disconcerting from that time.
Yeah, and that occurred just before he left, and he after the stage was robbed, they were going to continue on and get back to town, and he refused to do it. He was not going to ride on that stage again because he was half afraid that the stage driver, the crew there, might be in league with the robbers and that they'd get a second shot at him. So you're right. He went over to the mine. He made a phone call back to town, and he made his way back to town through other means.
Yeah, I seem to remember that he went to the Grand Central Mine to use their telephone to call the Tombstone Stock Exchange, which was it just blows your mind because you have this idea of this primitive town, 1881, Wyatt Earp, and then now the phones didn't connect to private residences, but the mines had the latest technology. Like you wouldn't be surprised if there was a computer in Antarctica at a mine. You know what I mean?
Exactly. You know, they were the guys at the mines had a fair amount of money at that point, and so they were going to do anything they could to enhance their advantage, and phones were put in very early.
Yeah, there was phones in the. I saw an ad, or I rented my book on Wyatt Earp in the Palace in Tombstone. In Tucson. It says telephones in rooms, and it's 1880. I think is really early.
Yeah.
Well,
what's interesting, or I find is interesting about Clum, is that he left for a couple of years and then came back to Tombstone around 1885. I think things had not worked out. The grass was not as green on the other side of the hill. So he came back. He became postmaster again, but it was downgraded because Tombstone at that point is starting to slide just a bit. So
well,
his money was cut.
quite a bit, yes.
Yeah, and he became a police judge. He got another couple of jobs that were not full time, and again struggled to make his way through. But the town continued to go downhill, and so he only spent 2 more years there before he left.
Wow! And then where did he go from there?
He was in Washington, D.C. for a while, and he was sort of all over the place. He eventually took a job with the Postal Department. He already had connections there, and they shuffled him around all over. He was in Kentucky. He was over on the East Coast. He was down in Texas. You name it. He went to California with that. And of course, ultimately, they in 1898 moved him up to Alaska to oversee the entire region's postal service. And he set up something like 50 stations, 50 post offices throughout what became the state. And without him, there wouldn't have been any mail service. And it was the forerunner of what's there today. He set up a communication system, in essence, that was very essential for Alaska to make any kind of move ahead. So he's still remembered back in Alaska for being a pioneer in taking Alaska forward.
Well, Mark, I I suspect we're going to be talking to you about a John Clum story for the November-December issue of True West magazine. So let's follow that up with a short break here, and we're going to come back and talk about the April and May issues of the Tombstone Epitaph, and we're going to go from telephones and mines to Billy the Kid living in a cave. We'll be right back on Tales of Old Tombstone.
Thank you, gentlemen. We always know we're going to learn something here we didn't learn before, and there's always going to be good stories. And by the way, that's true all over the world. We are discovering that Tales of Old Tombstone has listeners all over the world, particularly of all places in the United Kingdom. They want to have a little bit of the cowboy experience too. Well, you need to plan your trip to Tombstone. And of course, one of the best places to go is the Tombstone Monument Ranch. That's right. It's a real working ranch. It has a history, but right now it is very much a premier guest ranch experience. Now, it's not just the usual stuff. Of course, you can ride some horses. And of course, you can do some of those good things. But this could be a full cowboy experience. There are many, many unusual things to do to make it good for you and even for the family. And you're going to run into some amazing characters right there at Tombstone Monument Ranch. So check out their story and see if perhaps this could be part of your next real adventure. TombstoneMonumentRanch.com. That's TombstoneMonumentRanch.com, and tell them that you heard about them on Tales of Old Tombstone. Now, back to the program.
We're back on Tales of Old Tombstone with Bob Boze and Mark Boardman, both of them who are well-known historians in the Wild West History Association. They've both been plying their trade and tracking down the real stories of the Old West for, well, I'd say for at least 40 years. And one from Cave Creek, that's Bob Bell, and one from Indiana, the original Old West Hoosier himself, Mark Boardman, who's now the editor of the Tombstone Epitaph. And I have to tell you, this is when I got my April issue of the Tombstone Epitaph, I never knew this story about Billy the Kid and his proposed ranch and him living in a cave. Is that right?
You know, I'd never heard that story either, which is why it's good to have connections in the Old West field. folks come up with all these stories that we never heard about and lay out the whole thing. They got photos, etc. And yeah, Billy apparently at some point determined he wanted to be a rancher. He wanted to be a cowman, maybe like John Tunstall was. And so he had this plot of land outside of Lincoln, and basically a cave, which I suppose could have been used for a dugout eventually. And that was going to be the basis of everything. But, Billy was involved in so many other things that were not quite on the up and up. And he never got around to finding that peace and tranquility of settling down. But yeah, when they came to me with this story, I'm going, are you sure about this? And oh yeah, absolutely. We got the documentation. So more that's one of the benefits of having a historical paper like this, is that we reach out to people to get stories, but we have people who will reach out to us as well. And one thing that I found early on, and I've been there, about 5 years, I guess, is writers want to be in the Tombstone Epitaph. Why? Because of the name, because of the history of it. And I guess at this point, I sort of take it for granted, but they really would like to be associated with that and to be able to say, yeah, I was in the Epitaph. So that has helped a great deal in finding some interesting stories.
Bob,
one of the things that I love about what you just mentioned is the camaraderie and the fraternalism of the people involved, and that's the treasure in all of this for me, is that I can email you or call you and say, hey, Mark, we got this person over here who claims this. What do you know? And the next thing you know, I'm talking to Brad Courtney in Prescott, and he's telling it about the boarding house they just found and where Doc stayed, which
yes.
which by the way, ironically, I'm working on for the Epitaph even as we speak.
Yes. Yes, we both, you and I have come to know Brad Courtney and Stuart as well. And he's just a font of knowledge and stories. I'm telling you, he's got great stories to tell about Prescott. And I've had some people ask me, why do you do stories outside of Tombstone? And I said, because they're great stories of the Old West.
Yeah, and that story dovetails right back to Tombstone, because even though it's in Prescott, it's where Doc was twice before he went down to Tombstone. So I like all those stories that are tangential. And people ask me all the time, they say, well, how do you find out about this? And I said, well, the trick is to know somebody in the town where it happened and they've spent their life researching this. That's the trick.
Yes, that's exactly right. And once you get that, Brad just keeps coming up with more and more stories. The Billy the Kid Historical Coalition, which was behind the Billy the Kid cave story, they keep coming up with new things. So from my standpoint, it is a blessing, because first of all, I get to learn a whole lot of stuff. But second of all, it makes it a lot easier to put out a historical newspaper, because I don't have to dig for stories that are coming into me from people who have done the research and who know everything. And in most cases, they're pretty good writers too.
Yeah. Let me tell you a little synergy in this exact quadrant that we're talking about. So Brad Courtney contacts Stuart, who tells me that they're going to dedicate a plaque to the actual spot in Prescott, just off of the town square, where Doc Holliday roomed in 1879 right. with John J. Gosper, the future acting governor of Arizona. And I make the joke, how did Doc Holliday, a killer and a card player, sink so low as to room with an Arizona politician? But
exactly.
But here's where the story goes into what I'm calling this paternal wonderfulness. Okay, so there's a big question about Doc Holliday was on Wyatt Earp sent him a letter and said, you need to come to Tombstone. Him and Kate were still in Prescott. And so they start on their way, and they get to Gillette, which is about where New River is today. It doesn't exist anymore. And they have an argument, and Kate says, I'm going on the Globe. And then she says in her remembrances that Doc went on to Tombstone. Well, now we believe, thanks to Brad Courtney and other Gary Roberts and other researchers, now we believe that Doc went back to Prescott, and then he went back to Las Vegas, New Mexico, where he owed a debt. And that's a 583-mile run, and the knowledgeable people, the historians, said that he probably took a buckboard. Well, okay. So I sent this to Mark Lee Gardner, who we all know, and he's doing a new book on Doc and Wyatt. And I said, did he take a buckboard? Is there any evidence? The train was going in, so the Santa Fe. Is there any possibility he took a train? Mark Lee Gardner sends me this morning an ad in the Santa Fe New Mexican for November 1880. Of the stagecoach ride. It's $70. Okay, it's 86.5 hours.
Oh my!
Isn't that it makes the hairs in the back of my neck stand up. And that's going to be in the next issue of the Tombstone Epitaph and in True West. So there you go.
Outstanding. Well, that leads into another thought, if I can digress just a little bit, and that is, there's always been that theory because of the movies that Doc is going around Tombstone and around Arizona just hacking up his lungs, coughing blood into a handkerchief constantly. How could a guy who is dying that way make those kinds of long trips?
Oh, yeah.
Gary Roberts told me that he thought that when he was in Arizona, the disease was not that advanced, and in many respects, Doc was probably doing pretty well.
People were sent to Arizona in the 1920s that had TB to help cure the TB.
Exactly. But the movies, the movies. How could they have it wrong? The movies have it entirely wrong in that regard, because Doc was doing pretty well.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think one of the most stunning things to me is the distances they would go.
Sure.
And just even in the Billy the Kid story, you're reading it and he goes, he went from Lincoln to Fort Sumner. Well, first time I went out there from Lincoln, it's a 120-mile drive, and I'm looking out the window and I'm going, oh, this isn't some hike over a hill. This is going to another country.
Yeah, exactly. It is.
And the same thing's true going from Prescott to Tombstone. They make it, when you're reading it, you think, oh yeah, there was a 15-minute buckboard ride. No. You had to come out of the Bradshaw Mountains, down into the Agua Fria country, to the sleepy village of Phoenix, 150 people, all the way down to Saccatone to Tucson, then out from Tucson, shadowing the Southern Pacific Railroad, riding off the bank of it, to Benson, and then down the banks of the San Pedro, and then up over the hills into Tombstone. That's a 283-mile run.
It is. In a buckboard or on a horse or something that's not going to be terribly comfortable, that is rough.
Yep.
Well, and a few years ago, Bob, for True West Magazine, it was in one of our April travel issues, you asked me to write an article about On the Trail of Doc Holliday. So going back a few years ago, we published in True West a travel story, a travel log, that traces Doc's travels from Las Vegas, New Mexico, to Prescott. Then we discuss his return to Las Vegas, and then his route, or which route he could have taken. There were two choices when he finally left Prescott to get to Phoenix and down to Tucson, and then Tucson to Prescott. And then we conclude the story on their escape from Arizona Territory to New Mexico during the Vendetta era, when they leave and end up going all the way to Colorado. But it's the research and the documentation is really interesting, and I think that we all have to kind of step back and try to understand how time was different to them, and just the acceptance that it was going to take that long. And I believe it's in Gary Roberts' book on Doc Holliday where he has a note. There's some footnotes about their travels from Las Vegas. One of the diaries of one of the women traveling with them notes that they stopped in Zuni to water up and feed their animals. And actually Wyatt Earp had bought a buckboard hoping to start a stage line when they get to Tombstone. Of course, when they get to Tombstone, they realize that someone has already started a stage line. But I think it's fascinating, and it reveals the travels that they would take to get places, and that there were well-established roads. It wasn't just they weren't breaking through the wilderness. There were roads that were established, and Prescott and Santa Fe, of course, are the territorial capitals, and so they had established good lines of communications and stage lines to connect the two territorial capitals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And speaking of that, your cover story in the current issue of Tombstone Epitaph is The Unfinished Drink, the story of the Canyon Diablo shootout. So we're going to take a quick break and come back and talk about that, because that happens along that trail between New Mexico and Arizona.
Well, thank you, Stuart. Well, we are not only a sponsor, we are a provider. My name is Stan Husted, but what's really important is I represent the company that makes this possible. It's called the Cowboy Spirit Radio Network, part of a larger organization that is one of the podcast premiers in the world, the What It Takes Radio Company, and our special division, which is to help you who have a heart for the West, heart for the cowboy tradition, a heart for that kind of good storytelling, inspirational ideas, and bringing people together about something, as we say, it might just help save Western civilization itself. So if you'd like to know maybe how you could have your program, we can help you produce a Western quality, a cowboy quality, a first-class radio podcast. We can do that for you. So if that's part of your inclination, you'd like to finally do what everybody else is going to have to do, which is learn how to promote your business, promote your service, promote the good cause that you have using modern day digital internet radio called podcasting. So let us know how we can help you with your Western story or your business story or the story of your good cause. So just reach out to me at Stan, S-T-A-N, at witradio.net, Stan at witradio.net. And tell me your story, and we'll tell you how we can get your story on the radio.
We're back on Tales of Old Tombstone with Mark Boardman, the editor of the Tombstone Epitaph, and Bob Boze, executive editor of True West Magazine. And we are talking today about John Clum, the heritage of the Tombstone Epitaph, and in the current issue, the May 2024 issue of Tombstone Epitaph, the cover story is The Unfinished Drink, the story of the Canyon Diablo shootout, which is not too far from the Beals Wagon Road, where I'm sure they had to figure out a way to get around that canyon somehow, and then the railroad had to figure out a way to cross it, and it became one of those hell on wheels towns. Tell us a little bit about this, Mark.
Well, these guys were sort of standing on a corner in Winslow, Arizona. Well, not on a corner. They were in a bar, the Wigwam Saloon. That's a common name for a saloon, it seems like. They were in the Wigwam Saloon, and this was 1905, April. And they ordered a couple of drinks. Before they could consume the drinks, they pulled their guns and took all the coins from the bartender and proceeded to leave. Well, the local constabulary gets together and follows these two guys out the trail towards Canyon Diablo. They end up in a gunfight. One of them, John Shaw, takes a bullet and is killed. The other guy is severely wounded. Well, it was too great a distance to take Shaw anywhere back, so they pretty much buried him on location. Some of the cowboys who were around the bar still at this point got the news, and apparently in their cups felt very bad for Mr. Shaw. He hadn't had a chance to consume the drink that he'd bought. Now they're ignoring the fact that he took all the money, but they decide they've got to do something about this. So they go out to the gravesite, which is a bit of a ride. They go out there and they dig up the body. And then they proceed to take some whiskey and pour it down his throat. Now, this would be a remarkable story unto itself, except this is 1905, and there are portable cameras at this point. So they brought along a camera to document the whole thing. They've got photos of them holding the body up. He's got a weird grin on his face, and they're holding him up, and he looks like just another drunken cowboy as they're pouring alcohol down his throat. And they eventually get done, put him back into his coffin, dump the lid on and the dirt, and go back their merry way. It's one of those stories that sounds almost too bizarre to happen, and yet I guess alcohol will make people do some really strange things.
Well,
it did in this case.
You have two potent things. One is alcohol and the cowboy mentality. And I grew up in Kingman, and I have my Kingman cowboy cousins, and that's exactly the kind of demented thing that they would find funny. Let's go take that guy up and give him a drink. I've always thought those photos just a little beyond the pale in terms of I would be hard pressed to put them on the cover, but I think that's exactly what you did, didn't you, Mark?
We did. We're bold. We're bold. We're saying if it's a photo, it's going to grab attention. So let's put it there.
One of the controversies when I was growing up, it still comes up from time to time, is the dead people in True West. And one of our former editors, Marcus Huff, he used to laugh and call it a dead man in every issue. And and I have to admit that when I was 12 years old, and I'm looking at the Daltons sitting in that bank window, and that's the legend, it was a bank window, but there they are, stacked up. And I thought, oh my goodness, they're dead. And so I was talking to Bob McCubbin, who him and I bought True West when it was just about to go out of business in 1999. And Bob McCubbin was 12, and he was a charter subscriber to True West. Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And he was so ashamed that he hid his True West magazines under the bed so his mother couldn't find them. And it's been called now in this more sensitive time, death porn. And I remember I ran John Wesley Hardin on the cover. A big argument. This is before you, Stuart, so you could take a pass on this because you weren't there. But it was I questioned whether that was the right thing. But you give me hope, Mark Boardman, that a pastor would run three photos of a dead guy on the cover of the current issue of the Tombstone Epitaph. God bless you, son.
It's four.
It's four, Bob.
4 photos.
All right, sorry.
Including what I would call the vampire shot, where he's lying in the grave.
Many criticisms I've gotten so far?
How many?
None.
Yeah. Well, wait till my mother sees it.
Tell us a little bit about the author, David Grisey. Tell us a little bit how he brought that story to you.
David is based in Arizona and has written for us every, maybe 4 or 5 months, and always has a good sense of what we're looking for, and always has a good sense of story. And so we're pleased when he'll send us something and say, it's funny how many of these people, here's a story I've got. Do you think maybe you might run it? And I'm going, well, of course we're going to run it. We loved your stuff in the past. We're going to love this stuff too. So when David came to this story, I was familiar with the story. And in fact, I think we've run it in True West before. But I thought, it may be new to some of our readers in the Epitaph, and it apparently is. And we just had to go with it. And because part of what I do as an editor is determine what's going to grab people by looking at the front page. I don't have the amazing artwork of Bob Boze Bell, although we actually have used a couple of your art pieces over the past 5 years. But usually we're looking for some photos that'll really grab people, even if it's just a photo of Billy the Kid, even if it's just a photo of Pat Garrett, it grabs people and they say, aha. And in this case, the photos that we had, it was the dead guy, John Shaw, and his cowboy friends, and everybody drinking heavily. So we went with it.
Well, I love it. I think it's just a classic. I remember, I think the first time I ever saw it was possibly, in one of those, 10-pound encyclopedias of the Old West, gunfighters and the frontier from the Studio City Library. And, you can't believe what you're seeing or reading. And then I think I've seen it in the old issues of Arizona Highways magazine. And, but it's never, it's always a surprise to see it. And I think everybody will read it. It just has that, that quality that, as Bob was saying, that people are drawn to, when you see, such dramatic pictures.
One of the things that may stand out if people really look at the photos is these are cowboys. These are working cowboys that went and did this. But if you check them out, they're all wearing three-piece suits. And that includes John Shaw, the dead man, is wearing a three-piece suit. And, that flies in the face of what you think about they're in denim and they got, crappy clothes. No. Remember when they came in off the range, a lot of times they burned off their old clothes and bought some fancy new duds. And they not only wore them to nice places in town, they wore them back to work too. So that's kind of a funny side note on it.
Yeah. Well, I think so. And I think that's a great point and could lead to another discussion in terms of hats and Western wear and what did real cowboys wear a century ago. I mean, this is 1905. I mean, we're not talking about 1865. This is not too long ago.
That's right.
And then you open it, and there's a big article in here, an excerpt from by a couple of contributors and men we really respect in Western history. Don Shappett and David DeHaas have an article in here called "Tombstone Mining Successful Failures." Tell us a little bit about this and what they've been up to.
Well, I have known David in particular. I can't even tell you how long I've known him. A long, long time, probably 30 years. One of the first people that I got to know in the Old West field when I came here. And once he retired, he was an emergency room physician for most of his career and a collector of the Old West. And when he retired, he decided he was going to start writing things. So, in fact, he's put together a couple of books. Primarily, the first one was on the Earps and their Southern California days. And the current one is basically looking at the history of Tombstone through so many of the important people who lived and worked there. And I actually got a preview look at it ahead of time, and we worked on it together to some degree. I'm just trying to get the title. Well, I don't have the title right offhand.
Yeah, Tombstone, Arizona Mystique is the title.
That's it. Yes,
and
that's it. And this is a segment from that book, and it looks at E.B. Gage and William Staunton, who were two of the mining magnates of that time, and their efforts to try and strike it rich, and how it was sort of an up and down effort, which it was for so many of the men back then. They're not unlike so many of the others. They came into Tombstone, tried to make their fortune, might have made a fortune and then lost it. And most of these guys then ended up in Southern California within a few years.
Well, that's what I find interesting about their research that they have been pursuing the last few years, is that a lot of times when we write about Prescott or we write about Tombstone, they have really branched out and shown the connections. And we were just talking about how Doc Holliday went from Las Vegas to Prescott and then back to Las Vegas and then down to Tombstone, and people were on the move, and that so many people in this era, that all roads lead to Tombstone, all the roads leading to Prescott, but how many historical figures who built the modern West, especially the American Southwest, found themselves in Tombstone for some time period, and then their careers went on to a greater fame or not in
yes,
across Arizona and Southern California. And I think that that's really reveals the importance of Tombstone as a city of enterprise that led to so many people coming there and then seeking their fortune elsewhere when the mines closed.
Exactly. And, fortunately for many of them, when they went to Southern California, it was a boom area that was not going to collapse the way Tombstone did. Tombstone, of course, we know collapsed for a major reason because of the flooding that took the mines out. But in Southern California, they had other things, including just basic real estate in a beautiful area with perfect weather. And there were so many opportunities to make money either in real estate or in mining or in oil or other things that they might not have tried out in Southeast Arizona. And many of them had learned from their mistakes, whatever mistakes there might have been, that they'd made in Arizona, and turned it around and did very, very well in Los Angeles and San Bernardino and all the areas down there.
Which, including Wyatt Earp, who ends up, I think I've always liked to joke with Bob that Los Angeles was the West's most western town. And
yes.
I think it's fairly ironic that so many of these great western characters, many of them, their lives, they spent a great deal of time in Los Angeles, and some of them, of course, like Wyatt Earp, that's where his life ended. And but in celebration of Wyatt Earp, Tombstone's still kind of on the front end, the place to go to celebrate Wyatt Earp in the West. And for my calendar, May 25th and 26th is the next big weekend in Tombstone, Wyatt Earp Days, where you can walk the boardwalks of the historic streets of down there on Allen Street, and you go and search and celebrate Wyatt Earp and those Wild West days of John Clum, Tombstone Epitaph, and the battles with the cowboys. Which Bob, tell us, you've been down there for that event a few times, haven't you?
Oh, yeah. And let me back up just a little bit and say that when I met John Gilcrease, who was at the time, this is the 1960s, foremost expert in Wyatt Earp, and he had all the papers from John Flood. He had all the notes on the book that John Flood and Wyatt Earp were trying to write. And he opened a Wyatt Earp museum for a short time in 1974 in Tombstone. He told me that when he was growing up in Los Angeles, there was a place called Millionaires Row, and it was all former Arizona residents who made their killing in Arizona, mostly in freighting and transportation and the categories that actually ended up paying out of Arizona. So many people lost. Clum never quite made anything. Certainly Earp never made anything out of that. So I find it fascinating that there was a place called Millionaires Row in downtown LA. I've always wanted to go there, but I've never been able to find it. Have you guys heard about that?
I have. I wonder how much of it still exists with the way they tear things down and build new things up over there. But yeah, I'd heard about that. And what was interesting from Clum's perspective is, no, he never made it as big as many of those people did, but he kept contact with them for the rest of his life. He considered those folks friends. He could go to LA and visit and stay with them. And some of them also considered Wyatt to be a friend too. So the connection from Southeast Arizona never really was broken.
Yeah, and I have to say that one of the giants to me is John Clum, and that he's the one who named it the Tombstone Epitaph, because he said every tombstone needs an epitaph. I mean, that's just zany as hell. And so he's my hero, and I'm so thrilled that you, Mark, are the editor and you're taking it on and to greater heights. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. And of course, it was your comments to the owner, Bob Love, that really led me to that job and his consideration of me as a candidate for the position. So I owe you at least another Mexican dinner someplace.
You're on, dude.
Well, with that, we're going to conclude this episode of Tales of Old Tombstone. And Mark, we're going to have you back very soon. And thanks again for all your support at the Tombstone Epitaph. And we will be back next week. Bob Boze Bell and Stuart Rosebrook on the Tales of Old Tombstone.
Well, that wraps it up. Another adventure in Tombstone, Arizona. Again, brought to you by the Tombstone Monument Ranch. Remember, tombstonemonumentranch.com. Go check them out, look at their story, and then make your reservations. Do it now. Lots of people want to come to Tombstone, and you make sure you are one of them. So, tombstonemonumentranch.com. And thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Please recommend us to others. And if you have any questions that you would like us to answer, or perhaps you just simply want to know more, or give us a shout out, okay? Just reach out to me at stan@witradio.net, stan@witradio.net, and tell us what you think, tell us what you want, and tell us how we can serve you better as a fan of Tombstone. Hey, all the best and blessings as you ride out on your way. Till next time, bye for now.
Big iron on his head. Big iron, big iron. When he tried to match the ranger with the big iron on his hip. Big iron on his head.